Good evening. On behalf of the Iowa State Committee on Lectures and the Student Union Board, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's forum discussion. Before I introduce our program, I'd like to announce some upcoming speakers. We have Caroline Raffensperger, who will be speaking on the precautionary principle. We also have Patricia L. Cochran, and she'll be talking about using native traditional knowledge to learn about global warming. We have Mediating the Torah, a discussion of the Hebrew Bible in the popular press, and that'll be given by Bernard Greenspoon. And we have The Middle East, Global Energy and Terrorism, and that'll be a lecture by Flint Leverett. And then we also have an upcoming speaker for the Carrie Chapman Center for Women and Politics, and that is Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, and she'll be talking about our We Ready for a Woman President. And tonight, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for our forum on Don't Ask, Don't Tell policies in the military, Alex Nicholson.
All right, thanks a lot. Thank you all for being here. I especially want to thank our sponsors real quick, Student Union Board, the Committee on Lectures, and last but not least, the government of the student body for having us. We're here to talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the post-9/11 world. And this Call to Duty tour, essentially, let me tell you what that is to begin with. We're a group of young veterans, all recently out of the military. We have a cadre of about 12 speakers, and we speak around the country on the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in contemporary times. The panel we happen to have here today are 4 guys who are recently all out of the Army. And you're going to be hearing a number of stories about living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and leading under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But first of all, let me start off by setting a baseline. Some people know very well what Don't Ask, Don't Tell is and what it's about, and others don't. So let me start off by explaining exactly what Don't Ask, Don't Tell is and how it came about. Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a law. It's not a policy, although it's commonly referred to as the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. It's actually a law. And because it's a law, it cannot be overturned by Bush or a future president. It cannot be overturned by Rumsfeld or a future Secretary of Defense. It has to be either repealed in Congress or overturned in the courts. Now, Don't Ask, Don't Tell specifically says that gays and lesbians are allowed to serve in the military, but they cannot tell anyone, anywhere, anytime, any place, that they are gay. And furthermore, the law says that homosexual conduct is incompatible with military service. However, it equates speech with conduct. Therefore, the assumption is that if you tell someone you're gay, or someone happens to find out you're gay, there is the presumption that you will be committing homosexual acts in the future, which is deemed incompatible with military service. So Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a nice little soundbite for the law and the Department of Defense regulations to implement that law. But the way I like to describe it is Don't Ask, Don't Tell, don't be found out. Because you can not be asked, you can not tell, and someone could find out and you can still be discharged. Real quick, let me explain where it came from. Many of you may know this part already. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a Clinton-era campaign promise, or it was the result of one. Clinton promised to lift the ban completely on gays in the military in his early 90s presidential campaign. But when he got elected and when it came time to actually do that, he obviously encountered a lot of opposition from the Department of Defense and conservative members of Congress. What ended up happening instead was a compromise. They said the end result was that they were not going to lift the ban, but they were going to allow gays to serve without having all these arbitrary investigations and pursuing, these witch hunts and finding out, who was gay without any cause. But anyway, the result of that was the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law, which was a compromise between Clinton and his crowd who wanted to lift the ban completely, and the Department of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and conservative members of Congress who wanted to maintain an outright ban. Now, the rationale behind Don't Ask, Don't, keep in mind this is the early 90s. This is 92. It went into effect in 93 with the Defense Appropriations Bill. The rationale behind Don't Ask, Don't Tell is that the mere presence of a known homosexual in a military unit would undermine unit cohesion, impair morale, and degrade combat readiness of a unit. Now, that was 93. There's a lot of debate still going on whether or not those arguments were valid in 93. What we want to talk about is whether or not those arguments are still valid in 2006. Because as many of you know, we're currently in the middle of a retention and recruitment crisis, the war on terror, and we are continuing to discharge linguists, counterintelligence personnel, human intelligence personnel, medics, and so on under this law. Now, a lot of people, I'm going to transition into telling you my experience under Don't Ask, Don't Tell right now. A lot of people, keep in mind, don't even realize we still have a ban. I was discharged in 2002 because the wrong person found out I was gay, despite the fact that I was trained in human intelligence collection and spoke 4 languages at that time. I had come out to a few people, a few really close friends, whenever I was 19 years old and a new recruit in the Army. And one of my really good friends, or at least I thought she was a really good friend of mine, decided that she had a moral objection to the fact that I was gay when she found out. And in order to punish me for being gay, she was going to out me to my unit, which she did. Now, after that, I went through a really, really rough time because here I was, 19 years old. I had enlisted for 5 years, and 9 months into my enlistment, it looked like my career was over. I went through a really, really, really bad depression because one of the travesties of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is that it forbids you from talking to psychologists. It forbids you from talking to psychiatrists. It forbids you from talking to doctors and even to chaplains without fear of being turned in for being gay to your command and being kicked out. So, at 19 years old, I internalized all this and went through a really rough time. Well, the person I ended up breaking down to and talking about it, because you eventually break down and tell someone when this is going on, when you're getting harassment. And I should say, I got a little bit of harassment, which is what made it bad for me, but it certainly wasn't from everybody. It was a few bad apples in the bunch that decided to make life hell for me. And unfortunately, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is a policy that favors it favors the homophobes over qualified personnel. Don't Ask, Don't Tell is the only law we have that favors bad apples, in my opinion, over a minority group. We have, obviously, racists in the Army. We don't have a policy that favors racists. We have bigots in the Army. We don't have a policy that favors those. We have sexists in the Army. We don't have a policy that favors sexists. We have homophobes in the Army, and we do have a policy that favors homophobes over qualified personnel like these guys sitting in front of you today. Now, like I said, I eventually broke down and told what was going on to my supervisor, who had one of two paths he could have taken. He could have quashed the harassment I was getting, or he could have turned me into my command because he now knew I was gay. Unfortunately, he chose the latter route, and I was discharged about a month later. And therefore, the Army lost a human intelligence collector in the middle of operations in Afghanistan and someone who spoke 4 additional languages. Shortly after I was discharged, I went back to college and applied for and was granted a grant under a neat little program. Some of you may be aware of it, called the National Security Education Program. The Department of Defense gives grants to American college kids to go abroad and learn languages less commonly taught in the United States to forward the national security effort. It's essentially a program to augment the linguistic capacity of the American workforce. And so the Department of Defense, ironically, after kicking me out for being gay, gave me a huge sum of money to go move to the Middle East and learn Arabic as my 5th language. So now I speak 5 languages, including Arabic, and can't re-enlist because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. That brings me to a point that I want to drive home, and then I'm going to shut up. The national security impact of this policy. You know, being an Arabic linguist and trained in human intelligence collection, when the 9/11 Commission report came out, I don't know how many of you read it, but one of the things that struck me the most when I read it was the fact that it cites the inability of the Department of Defense's National Security Agency to translate intercepted cuts of intelligence from Arabic into English as one of the primary reasons behind the intelligence failures leading to 9/11. And one of the most famous phrases, one of the most famous cuts of intelligence made public so far was this phrase that's Bukra Sefr in Arabic, which means tomorrow is 0 hour. And it's one of the easiest phrases to translate from Arabic into English. Now, but it wasn't translated until 2 days after 9/11 because there's not enough Arabic linguists in the Department of Defense to get through the backlog of translation. Now, any one of the 54 Arabic linguists, Arabic alone, that the Department of Defense has been forced to fire because of this law could have easily translated that cut of intelligence from Arabic into English. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves from my point of view, and after this is over, I'm curious to hear what all of you think. The question we need to ask ourselves in 2006, it's not 1993 anymore, it's not the 80s, and it's certainly not the prejudiced days of the 60s and 40s. In 2006, we need to ask ourselves, do we really care if the person translating the next piece of crucial intelligence is gay or straight, as long as he or she gets the job done quickly and accurately and helps save American lives in the process? Now, polls consistently show, and I won't get too much into the numbers, but polls show and experiences show that there's obviously been a generational change since 1993 when this policy was last debated, at the national level anyway. So I'm going to sit down now and let you hear from some of these folks about their experiences living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, some of them openly for their entire enlistment without ever having a problem, which of course is contradictory to the rationale that if there's an openly gay person in a unit cohesion, morale, and combat readiness will fall apart. Now, the first additional speaker I want to introduce is Jared Chapowski, who was a Korean linguist in the Army for 5 years. Jared?
Good evening. I'd like to thank fellow veterans of the audience if you're out there for coming tonight. I just recently became part of your number last November. I served 5 years in the United States Army as a Korean linguist, like Alex said, trained at the Defense Language Institute in the Presidio of Monterey. It was during my time at DLI where I came to terms with my sexuality. See, I'd gone to basic training to kind of establish my masculinity. And I finished basic training, I went through it, got to DLI, and I came to the discovery that masculinity is by no means a measure of sexuality. So here I am in this institution with that revelation, and I can't tell anyone about it. I can't tell my peers, I can't tell my commander, can't tell psychologists, can't tell psychiatrists, can't tell counselors, because they're under the mistaken impression that if you come out to them, they are obligated to turn you into your command. So I don't want to talk to. So when you're dealing with something like this and you can't tell anybody, what do you do? Well, you tell somebody. And I told my best friend at the time. And his response was, "Oh, that's okay. I'm gay too." I felt pretty good. It felt good because he became my main point of contact. He became an even better friend because I could be myself around him. I didn't have to worry about being turned in. But it wasn't enough. See, ever since I joined the military, I'd seen this camaraderie that I wanted to be a part of. This sense of family that everyone always talks about and you'd see. I couldn't be a part of it because I couldn't be open with the rest of my peers. I couldn't be open with the rest of my friends. There's some part of myself that is holding back. And you don't keep stuff from your family. So I opted to tell them too. And one by one, I did. Every single time, I received a positive response. Shock at first, but a positive response. I wasn't harassed, I wasn't punched in the face, I wasn't called derogatory names, my friends didn't distance themselves. And after 3 months, it seemed my whole unit knew that I was gay. And it was no problem. And I wasn't known as Chapowski, the gay guy. I was known as Chapowski, the guy who's the PT stud, the guy who's good at physical training. And I was. And that set the tone for my entire enlistment. From Korea to Fort Lewis, Washington, from the primary leadership development course to when I get out in November. Though I had a positive experience in the military, there's always that chance that one moment of vindictiveness, one moment of pettiness could mean the end of a career. You could be in for 17 and a half years, and someone could out you to your command, and that's it. All your hard work is down the drain. It didn't seem like a very smart career path, so I opted not to re-enlist. It was a very hard decision to make, because I finally found that camaraderie. I fell in love with the Army. Now, you may think my story is an anomaly, that not everyone has this positive experience being openly gay in the military. That's not true. There are an estimated 65,000 gay and lesbian service members currently serving in today's military. Do you see that many discharged every year? No. You see maybe less than 1% of that number discharged every year. Now, like Alex said, like I said, when you have something that big, you don't keep it to yourself. You tell somebody. Let's say only 10% of the 65,000 came out to their peers. You still don't see them being discharged every year. Again, you only see less than 1% of that number. Gays and lesbians are serving openly in today's military. It is a fact. Yet you don't see any decrease in morale, you don't see any loss in cohesion, you don't see any detriment to battle readiness. All the facts, the supposed facts behind the rationale of keeping this policy in place, this law in place, are bogus. Now, if an openly gay service member is not a threat to unit cohesion or morale or battle readiness, what is? It is what we are doing to make up for the recruitment numbers instead of lifting the ban. There are a number of waivers that we have introduced. We have age waivers now, we have aptitude waivers, and we have moral waivers. And by moral waivers, I mean we are allowing convicted felons to join the military. Now again, my story is not an anomaly, it's not abnormal, even for soldiers who have served in Iraq, such as Patrick English. Patrick?
Thanks, Jared. My name's Patrick English. I served in the U.S. Army for 5.5 years as a Korean linguist, much like Jared. I joined the military when I was 17 years old, and at that time, I hadn't got accepted to the colleges I'd wanted to get into. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and I felt like I needed a sense of direction. I needed some discipline. So I saw the military, the Army, as this golden opportunity, this chance to really succeed and to do something with my life in a positive way. I really liked the idea of being able to be promoted based on my merits, and basically the job that I did, how well I did my job, would transfer over into how well I do in my career. So I signed up, and at that time I had some questions about my sexuality. I really wasn't sure. But I figured that, at that time I just sort of forget about that part, sort of bury that part of myself, because I saw service to my country as being more important and something that I really wanted to do. So I went into the military, went to basic training, and then I went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, just like Jared did over here. And, while I was there, I realized that, being gay wasn't just a phase. It wasn't something that was just going to go away like I had hoped. So I did start to come out to a couple of my close friends up there. While I was coming out to my friends, I was also coming out to my family. And I came out to my dad. He took it really well. My mom, not so much. My mother is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and at that time was untreated. and she was very paranoid. She was really worried, thought that the Army was watching me all the time, that they were going to catch me, and they were going to make life very difficult for me. And so she thought she'd save me that trouble and out me to my commander to get me kicked out. So one weekend, I wasn't on post, and she actually drove down, met with my commander behind closed doors, and I didn't find out about this until I got back from the weekend. And I was so angry at first when she said she was going to out me to my commander. I didn't take her seriously, but I was so angry because I couldn't see her wanting to ruin this thing for me. My career hadn't even started yet, and already she was going to destroy it, and the work that I put into it would just all be for nothing, and that opportunity that I'd worked for would just go away. So after that weekend, the commander called me in his office, and by that time I was so nervous. I was sweating bullets, and I thought, this is it. I'm finished. I'm going to get kicked out. But he sat me down, and he said, English, you're a good soldier, and we're here to support you, not your mother. So he told me to drive on and keep doing good things that I'd been doing, and, get out there and be a good soldier. So that's what I continued to do. I was stationed in Korea for a year. I did tactical intelligence work right along the demilitarized zone between the border of North and South Korea. While I was over there, I supported the 2nd Infantry Division, and we did about 10 field exercises, anywhere from a few days long to a month long, being out in the field. And I'd worked with these people now for about 3 years, and if I hadn't already come out to them, they kind of guessed that I was gay. So I was able to come out to a lot more people, and the entire time, I didn't have a problem. It was always a positive response, never anything negative. So while I was in Korea, the war in Iraq broke out. So I returned from my time in Korea to Fort Lewis, Washington, and then after about 8 months, I was on my way back overseas to Iraq. I was part of the new Stryker Brigade, which has the wheeled tanks instead of the tracked vehicles. And it's part of one of the new Army units out there. And since there's not much work for a Korean linguist over in Iraq, I sort of took up more of a logistics and support role. And so I did a lot of supplying logistics works, and I also, for the latter part of my time there, did a lot of intelligence analysis work. While I was over there, my intelligence shop was in charge of collecting, analyzing, and disseminating all the intelligence for northern Iraq. So I myself, was directly responsible for the capture of over 75 foreign insurgents due to my intelligence work over there. Now, the entire time that I was over there, I was also out to some people over there, and even my supervisors and superiors would maybe allude to the fact that I was gay, but never in a negative way. And like I said, I was never kicked out for it. So I just sort of wanted to share with you one last image, because one of the sort of rationales, like Alex said, behind keeping the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law in effect is that it would degrade combat readiness. Basically, the unit wouldn't be able to function in the time when it would need, when it would need to function the most. So I was stationed up in Rabia, which is a small border town on the Iraqi-Syrian border. I was up there for a couple of days doing an intelligence survey mission of the area with a couple of my buddies and an infantry platoon. So we drove in our Strykers. We got there. It was a very small little converted police station that we're staying at, a very small building, probably no bigger than this room that we're in right now, and also had a very small perimeter out in front of it. Now, after about 40 minutes of getting there, we were inside the building, and a suicide bomber drove into our front gate, and the car exploded, destroyed our gate, did extensive damage to the building and the neighboring buildings around it. Now, after that first split second of shock, I grabbed my weapon and I grabbed my gear and I prepared to respond in the way that I had been trained. And that's what my comrades around me did. Now, at that time, I can guarantee you that thoughts of my sexuality weren't going through my head. And I can also guarantee you that thoughts of my sexuality weren't going through the heads of my comrades either. Thank you.
No, don't go. I don't stink. It's cool. Thanks. Have a good night. Good evening. My name's Fred Fox. I spent 12 years in the Army. The first 8 were spent as an enlisted infantryman. That's the ground soldiers. These guys don't think they're very smart, but the best soldiers in the Army. Then I got out, went to college, went back in after doing an ROTC program, went in as an infantry officer, and then finished up as a quartermaster officer, YEHA Supply and Logistics. What I'm going to talk about, I'm going to tell you 2 leadership stories, and bear with me because they may seem disconnected, but I swear to God it'll all make sense in the end. One's about being a leader and one's about being led. And my story about being a leader, when I was a young squad leader, I had a shit-hot squad. They were phenomenal. I thought I was the best squad leader ever because I had these troops that would do exactly what they were told when they were told. They had brains. They were fast. They were excellent. And I thought, yeah, that's me. I'm a good leader. I have done this. Then I got in a soldier in my platoon who we called Billy. And if you have any military experience or you know anything about the military, if you're called by your first name, there's a reason for that. It's because you're special. And Billy was a special troop to my squad. He wasn't that quick on the upkeep, so to speak. A couple of examples. At the time, I was in a mechanized unit. And with mechanized vehicles, with tracked vehicles, in order to lock them, you lock them from the outside. You shut up all the hatches. They're sealed up, and then there's a lock that you put on the outside. In order to actually lock the keys inside of the vehicle, you have to lock the vehicle and then lift the hatch and slip the keys inside. Billy locked the keys inside of the vehicle. When I asked him why, he said because he didn't want to lose the keys. That way he knew where they would be. He was also responsible for starting 2 fires. One was by accidentally, and I do mean accidentally, mixing gasoline with mud and creating napalm. The other time was when he decided he would dry his clothes on a pot-bellied stove in the tent. I found out about this fire when he very casually came up to me and said, "Hey, Sergeant, my hat's on fire." So Billy was a challenge to me. Billy and I did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. He was a great troop. He was all heart. But he wasn't what I wanted. I wanted soldiers who were like me, who thought like me, who worked like me. Billy made me a leader. Because Billy wasn't my idea of perfect. I had a different opinion of what I wanted in a soldier than what Billy was. And because he was different than what I wanted in a soldier, I had to adapt in order to make sure that I could take him to combat and he could live. Leadership story number 2. In 1993, I was in the 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry Golden Dragons at Fort Drum, New York. It was a unit that would later be called by the Joint Chiefs of Staff the best trained unit in the Army. We went on a deployment to Mogadishu, Somalia, and were engaged in what later became the book Black Hawk Down, which then later became the film Black Hawk Down. That is a part of my life and my experience. In addition to the instances portrayed in Black Hawk Down, we were in numerous firefights, skirmishes. I was a young E4. I was an old E4, who am I kidding? But no, I was a young E4, and on the night of October 3rd, we were, good God, I think by then 10 hours into a firefight. Some Rangers had been shot down in town, and we had to go help them get out. One of the great and really exciting things about being in a firefight, and if you've never been in one, I highly don't recommend it, is that you do a lot of, we're going to go down this street, oh no we're not. We're going to go down this street, oh no we're not. And on that night, we got onto a street that we couldn't go down any further, and it was a street that we needed to go down in order to collect up some bodies. My squad was tucked back around a corner, and my squad leader came up to me and my battle buddy, and he said, "Foxworth, I need you to hop in the back of this Humvee because they're taking it around the corner to go collect up some bodies." We'd already been around that corner, and we didn't want to go again. But it only took us a split second to jump into the back of the Humvee and to roll around the corner. And that was because we were trained and we had faith in our leadership, and we knew that, yes, we could be rolling around the corner to our death, but that was what we were there to do. I did this because the leadership in my unit made me believe that I could do this. I had my first platoon sergeant was Sergeant First Class Thompson, an amazing man who taught me a lot. Our battalion commander at the time was Lieutenant Colonel William C. David, a man who I still credit with giving me my life. We hated him at the time. We called him King David because he was a dick. He made us do things we didn't want to do. He made us train. He made us train hard. He made us live when he took us to war. He was part of an even bigger history, a history of leadership and loyalty and an infantry pride that is written in blood. A history that goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, well, even beyond, but particularly to General George Washington and his staff when he was creating this revolutionary army that was going to overthrow the evil British. Oh, we forget that we hate the British, don't we? And when he was putting this army together, he needed help creating order and discipline in the unit. So he brought on board a Prussian named Baron Friedrich von Steuben, and he said, hey, I need help creating order and discipline in my revolutionary army. Well, von Steuben created what was called the Blue Book. It still survives today in the Army. It's the Drill and Ceremony Manual. So the man who started and has continued to this day to be an influence on order and discipline in the Army, well, he was a gay man. So don't tell me that gays are detrimental to good order and discipline in the military, because good order and discipline in the military can be traced back to a gay man. Now for don't ask, don't tell in me as a leader. Don't ask, don't tell to me as a junior leader in the Army is an insult, and not to gays, but to me as a junior leader, to a platoon sergeant, to a platoon leader, to a company commander, because it says two things. Number one, it says you are going to have soldiers in your unit that we are going to require to lie to you. They will be in your unit, but they will lie to you because we tell them that if they don't lie to you, they're going to get kicked out. The last thing I need in my platoon is a soldier who's going to lie to me. I need honesty. I need integrity. And there's a policy that says, no, your soldiers must lie to you. The second insult to me as a leader is the fact that it thinks I am so incompetent. I keep saying the F word at that part. So I made it. I am so incompetent. I am so incompetent as a leader that if I have a soldier who's gay, my entire platoon is going to fall apart. That I can't even control them, that the morale is going to go to hell, they're going to not obey me, they're going to run around and just do whatever the hell they want because I am such a bad leader that I need this policy to keep those soldiers silent, to not announce that they're gay. Another argument is the soldier discomfort. No soldier wants to be in the foxhole with a faggot, as the saying goes. No soldier wants to get up at 4:30 in the morning for first call. Okay? No soldier wants to do police call. No soldier wants to do a lot of things. If we ran the Army based on what soldiers wanted to do and what they didn't want to do, well, we'd all be speaking British to this day. So... kill me. So to me, what it all boils down to is a question of discipline. I spent 12 years in. I pride myself. I loved the Army. I pride myself on my infantry pride. I pride myself on my pride in the Army. And part of that is following orders. And if you tell me, take the hill, I will take the mountain. If you tell me, hold the high ground for 4 hours, I'll hold it for 20. Because that's what I do. I do more than you ask of me because I'm a soldier and I follow orders. If you tell me, get in the back of that Humvee and roll around that corner, I will be in the back of that Humvee in a second. If you tell me serve with a gay soldier, I will do it, because soldiers follow orders. That's what soldiers do. And if they don't follow orders, they die. That's the nature of our job. Thank you.
We would like to open up the panel to some questions, and I'd like to ask you to direct your questions to the microphone in the back room, please. Thank you.
No, it's in the room.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to be first.
Yeah, don't be shy.
And by the way, I should say too, if there's anyone in the room who dissents and doesn't agree with us, please don't feel uncomfortable or like you're going to be pounced upon by us just because we favor lifting the ban. If you don't favor lifting the ban, we really would love to have a dialogue with you and be respectful of us, and we'll definitely be respectful of you.
Yeah, we keep things at a very intellectual level. I promise. Oh, everyone except for
Yeah, I'm not all that smart.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to go to the microphone, just raise your hand and you can do it from your seat.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're proposing to do away with the don't ask, don't tell. Are you proposing to go back to the previous legal scenario where being gay in the military was just not part of it? Where do you want to take this in terms of legislation? It is a law.
There's actually a that's too loud. There's actually a bill in the House right now sitting in committee. It's called H.R. 1059 of the Military Readiness Enhancement Act, and it proposes to replace the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law with a policy of non-discrimination. And again, because it is a law, it has to be removed either through legislation or through the courts. It cannot be removed by executive order, which was how it was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was introduced. Currently, there are 110 co-sponsors of the bill, including 4 Republicans, and but it is still stalled in committee, and there is no companion legislature in the Senate.
And I'll add to that too that before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a law, it's not quite that there was no policy. There was a policy. The policy was just that there was an outright ban on homosexuality in the military. Whereas when the law was implemented, it said that, and there was all kinds of other things too, like arbitrary investigations. There was an extreme amount of leeway that a commander would take in pursuing anyone he thought to be homosexual. There's a history of witch hunts and all kinds of nasty things. 24, 48-hour interrogations of people they suspected to be gay, where they would, coerce and worse people into giving up names of other suspected homosexuals, etc. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in theory, ended that and replaced it with a policy literally that's supposed to function. We won't ask you if you're gay. You don't tell us if we're gay. We won't pursue finding out who is gay, and we will prevent people from harassing you if you're suspected of being gay. Unfortunately, the only thing that's really enforced is the don't tell part of that. You're still asked. There are still pursuits, and there certainly is still harassment. But there certainly was. It's not that there wasn't. It wasn't an issue back then. It was just a lot worse than it is today.
Question about what you were just talking about. Right now in the Army, there's sort of at least a de facto affirmative action in the upper echelons as far as promotions. Would you want similar protection for homosexuals?
That is a good question. And that's really more of a debate on affirmative action than the Don't Ask, Don't Tell itself.
I would personally say no, because I wouldn't normally just in any administrative capacity identify myself as gay. I mean, I think a lot of people misunderstand what we mean when we say we want the ban lifted. It's not that we want to just come out, you know, and march next year's Pride Parade through the post gates. It's more about wanting to be able to serve where if you happen to be found out that you're gay, you won't be discharged. Just that you don't have to live with this cloud of fear hanging over your head that you could be discharged if someone finds out, or if it happens to come up when someone says, "Oh, what did you do last night?" or etc. But I mean, I don't think that I would really personally, self-identify as gay, publicly. I mean, if it comes up, it comes up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But
I think the underlying question is, do you think that if the ban were lifted, people would have difficulty getting promoted because of this, they are openly gay, and because of homophobia would prevent them from being promoted? Is that correct?
In some ways, yes. I mean, there's no box to check, are you gay or not?
Right.
But also sort of along the same lines, would you want like special protection as far as right now you're forbidden to use racially derogatory terms, and you can be punished for that? Would you be in favor of someone said faggot?
Well, there's already protection against that.
Okay.
It's already in place.
Yeah.
There's DO policy.
Yeah, there's an anti-harassment action plan that was put into effect after Barry Winchell was murdered in 1999, and it has 13 points that were supposed to be followed by the Department of Defense. Now, unfortunately, the policy hasn't really been implemented, and at least not all the way across the board. That's something that Congress put into effect and also called on DoD again in 2003 to ask why it hadn't been implemented. So the policy's in place; it just needs to be enforced.
Well, just a little bit about myself. I was also in the Army. I know Patrick. We were in almost exactly the same time. I was at DLI. I'm a Russian linguist. And you said that 54 Arabic linguists had been kicked out under the policy, but I knew personally 4 of those linguists. I was a roommate with one, with the basic one, was in the same class, and I was in the same squad with 2 more. And I know that they came out. They came out to the commander. They went to the commander's office and said, "I am gay. I went out of the Army," because they didn't get their clearance, because they couldn't pass their language, and because they wanted to stay with their girlfriend. Like, I understand how much of a travesty this is, but at the same time, I think you should take those into consideration, that these people weren't forced out of the military. They wanted to get out, and they used the rule to their advantage.
But the policy still gave them a means to get out.
Exactly, but maybe that's a different reason for not having a policy.
Well, I guess.
Go ahead.
Well, if you wanted to say, okay, well, of those 54, 4 that you used the policy to get out. I left the Army because of the policy by choice. I was not put out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I got out because I could no longer stand. I mean, I had 12 years in it. I couldn't take it anymore. So if you want to look at specific numbers, the specific numbers when we quote 54 linguists, we don't know how many linguists got out because of the policy, but not necessarily under the policy. So, the 54 is probably a very small number, even though specifically of 4 who got out because they wanted.
I just want to use that as for instance. Because
Sure.
5 people I know, 1 was forced out and 4 chose that. So when you use that number, I think you should be a little more careful.
Well, I think you make a good point too, because at the same time, us sitting up here we take a very pro-defense stance. And I think it's a shame that we have a policy that allows someone who just says, "I don't feel like doing this anymore. I got my, DOPT, I got my language qualification, and now I'm going to hit the road and go make $120,000 a year as a private contractor." I think it's a shame we have a policy that allows people to do that.
That's one of my main problems with policy, or just the way people use it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of side effects to policy, other than just the fact that there are many people who want to serve, but you happen to be found out and get kicked out. I mean, another side effect is that there are tons of cases of heterosexual women being forced out because of the policy, because an egotistical commander said, "Well, if you're not submitting to my sexual advances, you must be a lesbian." We've met people, of course, we've been doing this for a while, and we've met a lot of people who've been affected by the policy, and I've met a number of people. Actually, now that I think about it, both lesbian and heterosexual women who have been forced out because a commander or a superior made a sexual advance, they didn't succumb to it, and so they said, well, you must be a lesbian, so I'm going to kick you out. So there are a lot of side effects of it other than just the obvious.
I was just curious, what is the rationale for allowing what you call moral exceptions and competency exceptions?
Oh, the moral waivers program?
Well, I will understand they're desperate for people.
That's exactly what it is for people.
What's the rationale?
The specific details of the moral waivers program will be released by the UCLA?
UC Santa Barbara.
UC Santa Barbara is doing a study on it. Dr. Aaron Belkin of the Center for the Study of Sexual Minorities in the Military. And that report will be released relatively soon.
That's a good question. I'd really like to know that too. I don't know that the DoD has commented on it, just because I don't believe it's been thrust out to the public arena. I think the study that we know that's getting ready to be released on it, I'm sure will cause the DoD to comment on it. So it'll be interesting to see what the rationale is. But I mean, it's become in recent months a known fact that they started waiving convictions for aggravated assault, robbery, manslaughter. There are a number of other felonies that can now be waived. I mean, I'm sure they don't waive things like murder or rape, but there's a whole list of them that I've seen that they do waive under this new moral waivers program. And I mean, hell, to me, talk about, I think I'd rather have, and I'm just assuming because I'm a gay man, and Fred made this point last night, but if I'm serving in a unit, I would rather have a gay person in my unit who is well qualified than someone who's been convicted of, aggravated assault. I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer to me, but.
And also a question, it seems that the rest of you had okay experiences with coming out or being known as being gay in the military. What, you seem to be the exception. What happened? Did you just have a particularly
Bad day.
ignorant officer? I just don't understand what happened that created the exception.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's well, I mean, you have to kind of understand too. It kind of the situation that is the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy kind of creates an arbitrary situation in the military where you can be open to all your peers, serve for 5 years, as Jared's case was, and happen to never run into anybody in those 5 years that said, I want to be vindictive, or I want to punish you, or I don't like this and I want to use it against you, or a civilian who says, like another guy that was with us in Georgia, his civilian pastor found out and said, if you don't go to homosexual conversion therapy, I'm going to turn you in your career. And he most certainly did. And but I mean, it's really arbitrary because you can run into a person who just decides they have a problem with it and they're going to turn you in, or they're going to coerce you with it or something like that, as was my case and as was Tim Smith's case, who was in the Marines. Or you can serve for 5 years like Jared and Patrick, well, I don't believe Fred was open, but Jared and Patrick were both open the entire time and never had a problem. You could serve 19 years, 20 years is retirement in the military. You could serve 19 years, 11 months, and 29 days and never have a problem. And on your last day, they can discharge you under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and you can lose all your benefits. So it's a very arbitrary situation, and I mean, it just depends on who you know, who you meet, and who decides that they want to use or abuse the policy.
Do you think certain branches are more tolerant than others, more likely to be tolerant?
I think you tend to think that the more grunt-ish branches like the Marines would be more intolerant, but I mean, I had a really good friend when I was in college. He was a Marine in Georgia, and he was out to his unit. Even his gunny sergeant knew he was gay, and he didn't have a problem. I was in an MI unit in the Army, which you would think is a little bit more liberal than an infantry unit in the Marines, and someone made help for me. So
Also to elaborate on that, on 2 of our engagements, we've had straight military members show up, and in both cases, they were Navy SEALs.
What are the processes behind Don't Ask, Don't Tell that have costed the military over $300 million since it was implemented?
$363 million. Yeah, that was released by the Blue Ribbon panel, which I actually had an opportunity to be part of. Again, Dr. Aaron Belkin of the command, the Center for the Study of Sexual Minorities in the Military, was the one who fronted that. And keep in mind that that monetary amount is very conservative because it doesn't take into account a service member such as myself or Patrick or Fred who ought not to re-enlist because of the policy. And I mean, just Patrick and myself alone, that's a couple $100,000 worth of training. It's not accounted for.
Right, and the actual cost was for recruiting and training. So it was a very, like I said, very base level, and they only took the recruiting and the training costs into account. So it was the cost of having to retrain someone in a job that was kicked out under the law.
Do any of you know of any higher ups in the military that found out that somebody was gay and kept it under wraps and then later got in trouble for it and disciplined? Or is that not existent? Has anybody ever gotten in trouble for keeping the secret that somebody else was gay?
Well, we did have a like Alex said, a Marine with us, Tim Smith. Unfortunately, couldn't be here tonight, but his command had basically found a letter that basically proved that he was a homosexual. They found that 6 months earlier, and then when his pastor put pressure on the command, and I guess found a profile on Yahoo that just had a mention of that he was gay on it, used that. Took that profile in and sort of put pressure on the command for that, and because they had both the letter and the profile, they couldn't ignore it anymore. So they didn't really get in trouble, but they knew that they couldn't ignore it anymore, or that would be a strong possibility. And unfortunately, puts commanders in this really awkward position because it says, we're gonna force you to lose good soldiers, even if you want to keep them, and if you do try and keep them, there's always a possibility of of repercussion. So.
Question, then a couple comments if you don't mind. The question would be, each of you persons must have some roots in some state. I would guess you're not Iowa. Fair to say?
It's Georgia.
I'm from South Carolina, rural South Carolina.
California, now Washington State.
Michigan.
Thank you. And I think early in the program you said there were something like 12 persons like yourself making these presentations.
Yes, sir.
Yes, correct.
My comment is that I think you're to be commended for the contacts you're making and the people that brought you here to make this encounter is wonderful. I'll just relate personally, give you some personal stories, so I'll give you one. The group doesn't mind. Nobody's objecting. Wow, is it Patrick?
Yes.
I was there when they made the military zone as an officer in the artillery. To my knowledge, all my training time and all my service, I never knew I had a gay person in my command. But I want to tell you this: the referral you made to the commission, every American ought to be somewhat upset with the $363 million that it cost us in conservative figures the last 10 years because of this policy. And you say it's the law. It seems to me that your mighty 12 and the rest of us ought to be appearing at those caucuses and those county and state conventions that are now ongoing in Iowa. And if nothing else, it will take some time. But it probably isn't going to be done by duffers like me. It's going to be done, maybe some commentary like this, at the right place. Politically, you'll do it. But if it's law, you'll change the law. And it has to be done through the process. So I would encourage everybody in this room that cares a bit about what you said, where the country's going, to be avid about getting something done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll throw in real quick as a response to that. I think a lot of people don't realize there have been. Whenever I started out, I mentioned there have been a number of polls done on public opinion, and of course polls can be manipulated. But whether or not you go with there's a poll, CNN, Gallup, USA Today poll found that 79% of the American public favor lifting the ban. But even Fox News' own polls found that 63% of the American public favor lifting the ban. But what's more telling, if you look at the demographic breakdown within those polls, for example, the CNN USA Today poll done by Gallup, 91% of the demographic 18 to 29 favored lifting the ban, which is certainly a change since 1993. when, of course, people were arguing, well, junior service members would just go nuts and start disobeying orders if you had an openly gay person in the unit. But, the legislation that's been introduced in the House right now, the Military Readiness Enhancement Act, by Marty Meehan of Massachusetts, he actually spoke with us when we spoke at Harvard a few weeks ago, proposes, like we said earlier, to replace the policy with a policy of non-discrimination. And, of course, we were talking to, I'll say this real quick, we were talking to a few weeks ago, actually about a month and a half ago, Nancy Pelosi, who's the House Minority Leader, about why she's the representative from one of the most liberal districts in the country, San Francisco area, the Bay Area, and she's not signed on because she says that she personally believes that the policy is ridiculous. But as minority leader, as Democratic leader in the House, there's some conservative Democrats she feels that don't feel like they personally believe the policy should be lifted, and if it came to a floor vote, they would probably vote yes. But they're not signed on to the bill to lift the ban right now because they don't believe they have political cover back in their home districts in order to do that. The conservative, even my representative, John Spratt from South Carolina, is not signed on because he comes from a very conservative district, although he is Democratic, but a Democrat. But that's the biggest thing. You're right. People need congressmen and women need political cover in their home districts in order to do that. Because we've talked to a lot of people doing this, a lot of congressmen, and a lot of them personally believe that it should be lifted, but they want to get reelected. So they need political cover in their home districts in order to do it. Yes, sir.
I'm a school teacher, and I'm always concerned how language affects the way we think. And the problem that we have in discussing has been a historical one throughout the history of mankind. So I'm going to ask you four guys, and any of you can answer it. This may seem like a strange question, but I want to show people here how language influences our thoughts. So my question I'm going to ask you is, what physical shadow, what is the largest physical shadow any of you four have experienced? Physical shadow. Like, you go outside and you're standing under a tree, you're a shadow. What's the largest one you've ever experienced?
A cloud.
A cloud.
An eclipse?
An eclipse.
I'd have to agree with Fred and say cloud.
The eclipse.
No, he said cloud.
Yeah, both.
Well, I'm going to tell
I want to say both too.
I'm going to tell you what the largest shadow any human being has ever experienced. It's called night. Now, our ancestors that have been on this planet since day one knew what night was. But they had no idea that the earth rotated and constantly. I am really concerned at how the knowledge from thousands of years ago still influences the thinking that goes on in our society. And I think the society needs to replace its idiocy of understanding. I go around the world and I get to teach all over the world and ask. I walk into a classroom. The first thing I ask anywhere in the world before I teach anything is I ask the kids in the class, do you know what I see when I see you? I've done this in Russia, the Czech Republic, the Ukraine, all across the United States, Guam and Taiwan. And I ask that question. 99% of the time, I don't get an answer. If I do get an answer, I get, well, you see a student. So I'm going to tell you, and I tell the kids this, and I'll ask everyone, what do you see when you see yourself? Because I'm going to tell you what I think you should say, because I'm telling you what I'm going to say, what I see. I see the most precious thing on the planet Earth. That's the way you should see yourself. Because if you do, you don't do anything dumb or stupid. I'm the most precious thing on the planet Earth. See the person sitting next to you? They also see the most precious thing on the planet Earth. So now you know how to treat them. Now, all this stupidity that has gone on throughout the history of this world drives me crazy. Because I don't like the knowledge and the understanding of things that got ingrained in society and religion and whatever else you want. Because they didn't understand. One of the first promises in the Bible that God made was to be put a rainbow in the sky. They didn't know what caused a rainbow because of the knowledge. We're living, I'll give you another example. I live in a country where we have constitutional rights. I'm glad I do. But the guys that wrote the Constitution 250 years ago, they never saw electricity, a light bulb, a car, an airplane, a computer. All the knowledge in the world did not exist at that time. Yet we still allow that knowledge to try to control our societies today. And we need to start treating people as human beings.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate your comments.
I was going to say, I think another cost of this policy that maybe can't be talked about is that people such as many of us in this room who don't even consider the military as an option because of the policy. That's a huge loss of talent and capabilities and stuff that never see wise. But I have two questions also. Is this law being challenged in court? And how do you categorize feelings of the enlisted folks who serve next to it? I know there's probably focus, keep talking about harassment, but overall, are they supportive when you left, shows the lead? Did any of them approach you and say, are with you or whatever?
Well, I did not serve openly. By the time I finally got comfortable with my sexuality, I was an officer, and that would have been extremely dangerous for me because it goes a little bit beyond just getting kicked out once you're an officer. But I had a few close friends that I shared that I came out to. In particular, my roommate. I thought it would be appropriate for him to know. And they were all incredibly supportive. When I finally left the Army and I came out to all of my friends and the people that I worked with in the Army who I wasn't certain of, I didn't feel comfortable enough with, to the T, every single one of them expressed great sympathy and sadness that I did not feel I could trust them with my sexuality, which hurt, but they understood. And I do have one friend who was possibly coming to see us when we were down in Missouri, who same idea, except he, on religious grounds, is opposed to my sexuality. And so he has a very hard time with it, but nonetheless considered it an honor to serve with me. So that's my answer to the second part of your question. As for the court part, there's two cases right now that are being tried, and this is where I pretend to be stupid because I don't remember their names.
Cook v. Rumsfeld and Lockhart Republic versus the United States.
There you go. Right. What he said. Where they're working their way up the federal court system.
One was filed in Massachusetts and one was filed in California. They're both in relatively early stages in the federal court system. There's been a motion to dismiss as a standard by the government, and both cases are waiting on a ruling on the motion to dismiss by the government.
There was a question over here? Or not?
I was just curious if you thought that if the law was changed, if it was repealed, would there be a large uproar in the Army? Or do you, technically, the majority of people would be against it? Or do you think it would be a minority that was particularly loud that was against it?
That was a big fear when 25 of our allies lifted their ban on engaging the military, including the Brits and the Israelis. And it didn't happen in any one of the cases.
And I would go, once again, back to the issue of leadership. Soldiers don't have big uproars. If they do, there's a leadership problem in that unit. It's not an option as a soldier to stand up and go, "What? This is crazy. You want me to do what?" That doesn't, it can't happen.
I can't remember which one of you said this, but one of you said something about talking to civilian counselors, pastors, whatever, and then feeling, I think, whoever said it said wrongly about that they needed to turn people in. Is that part of the law? I'm not clear on that.
The service provider chaplains, psychologists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, medical professionals in the military have the option to break provider-patient confidentiality and turn someone in, or they can be compelled by a command to answer honestly whether or not a patient or a subject going to a chaplain confided in them that they are gay. So yes, there is, for all intents and purposes, no provider-patient confidentiality in the military.
And that's in part because the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law, when you are discharged under it, it's an administrative proceeding. It's not an actual criminal case. It doesn't go to court. So certain like Alex said, provider-patient confidentiality just doesn't exist. Because it's not, it can never be used as evidence in court. It's just used for an administrative proceeding, as well as the military, trains a lot of these people that work as civilian contractors, and they train them that if someone tells you you're homosexual, you need to report that to the commander because it's not in accordance with with military policy.
But legally, they're not required to, unless they're compelled to do so by a commander. But they also can turn them in on their own volition.
How does the military respond to bisexuals and transsexuals, those who don't necessarily identify themselves as homosexual but along the same lines?
Transsexuals do not fall under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law because it's an issue of gender identity as opposed to sexual orientation. So it would be more of a medical issue.
And then bisexuals are treated. The root of the whole issue is homosexual conduct, and so bisexuals, if they are found, if they make a statement to be bisexual, or if they are caught or something like that engaging in homosexual activity, they're treated the same. Bisexuals fall under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell dynamic.
And they also, if you want a juicy bit, it falls into the same, the structure of the UCMJ. It falls. It's connected with adultery. It's also connected with sodomy, which, if you want to use the military's interpretation of sodomy, everyone would be kicked out. Excuse me for speaking so boldly, but everyone who's enjoying themselves would be kicked out.
I don't know. I agree that maybe Don't Ask, Don't Tell was an attempt to make a step in the right direction. I'm not supporting it, certainly, because I'm a veteran. I served in Vietnam. I served, like Fred, in a combat area with homosexuals, some of whom were out, some were not. In my military experience, there were commanding officers and non-commissioned officers who were very sympathetic and just said, don't talk about this crap. We're all this thing together. Let's just do what we need to do here, which is, for the most part, I found in my history in the military, that was the mode. And I think that was because primarily it was a war zone. It was everyone was saving everyone else's life, essentially. But my concern is we're in a very conservative time now, politically. We're probably in a far more conservative time now politically than we were when I was in Vietnam. I know that for a fact. And my concern is, I'm not saying we shouldn't upset the apple cart, but if we do, and the thing spills out, what's going to keep it from getting worse? That's my great fear.
Well, I think, and that is a very valid question. Who's to say that instead of removing the law and replacing it with non-discrimination policy, they won't just put the ban, put an outright ban into effect? But I think our hope is that when because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was sort of a small step in the right direction, like you said, and now there's been over 12 years now to collect all the evidence, and all the evidence has been collected, and basically see how this law has worked and how it hasn't worked. So hopefully, when the hearings are reopened again on the issue, people will be able to take a look at all the evidence, our stories, service members, just see how the military is progressing, see if in fact it can actually, if removing the ban could actually happen. So, And I think we're confident that it wouldn't go back to an outright ban.
I don't think it would either, because, I mean, no matter how conservative the Congress may be, they still listen to the constituents. And 79% of the constituents are for lifting the ban. And we have gone to various events trying to get opposition speaker to make things more interesting, so we can have a debate on stage, and no one wants to stand up for the policy. No one wants to stand up for the policy. And even Charlie Moskos himself, the architect behind the Donna Stonehill policy, our law, said that if we were to go into a draft, we'd have to remove the gate ban altogether. So.
Yeah, too, and keep in mind too, since we got donuts until in '93. For example, in '99, the Brits lifted their ban, and before 1999, people used to say, "Well, we can't lift our ban. I mean, if our closest ally doesn't have a ban, we shouldn't either, has a ban, has not lifted their ban, neither should we." And now, whenever you point to the fact that the Brits lifted their ban, they say, "Oh, well, that's a different story. We're not like the Brits." But they lifted their ban and had a positive experience. Their military did not fall apart. They are still, combat ready. And now they're serving. We had the experience of them serving beside us in Iraq. We have the experience of contractors bunking and showering and doing all these other things right alongside active duty military personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we haven't had a problem.
Well, and it's was there a question? I'm sorry. All right. It's another kind of thing that fascinates me is the fact that when the British overturned when they allowed gays to openly serve, the polling number of the British troops was 30% in favor, 70% opposed. So when the British did it, they actually had a majority of their armed services that were opposed, or members of the armed services that were opposed to lifting the ban. Now, the Army Times, which is not affiliated with the Army, but it's the paper that everybody in the Army reads, did a poll last year, and the numbers are the opposite. So in the ranks, it's 70-30 the opposite way. So we're at the same point the British were, but in reverse, and we still think it's going to hurt.
So I'm kind of getting the idea here from what you said that this is kind of a law that thrives on silence.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It thrives on being hidden in the committee rooms or whatever you want to call it in Congress. And then if it were to come out, if it were to come out on the Senate floor, it would probably be history. Because if it were to come out and be voted on, we know what senators are responsible, and we know who would take action against. But I guess until it really comes out, and until it gets a vote, and until every senator and representative has to take a stand on it, it's not really paid that much attention to, and it just, like I said, thrives on silence and ignorance.
Especially the defense thrives on silence. The defense of this law, in the post 9/11 world where we need a strong military, the defense, their way to defend the policy is to not allow it to be discussed. So yeah, silence is it's as great of a tool as ignorance is.
So they basically use whatever resources they have, political capital, keep it under wraps.
Correct.
And that way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, because it is a law, there's a definite uphill battle to repeal such a thing. And Congressman Meehan, who did introduce this bill to repeal the policy, Duncan Hunter of California is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, and he will refuse to discuss the issue. He will not open hearings on the issue, which he could do, and he's the one that could bring this bill out of committee. And unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like there's enough pressure on Congress, because it seems like they've really fallen behind. If the American public is in favor of lifting the ban, then why will Congress not follow suit? But unfortunately, there are a few people who don't want to see that happen.
We need to realize that people who keep it from getting to the floor are basically supporters, and we should quibble we should see that anyone who's trying to stop it is basically standing up for it.
Well, the Army gets a bum rap a lot, but one of the things that just fascinates me about this when we talk about, the American public is behind it, The Army was the leader in national integration. The Army had black and white soldiers serving side by side in the Korean War before Rosa Parks sat down on a bus. And the Army prides itself on that. They talk about how we were the first to integrate, and this was, something, aren't we great for what we've done? And yet, for some reason on this issue, the Army is lagging behind.
Last outposts of government-sanctioned bigotry. Really.
Right.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, as military people and people who are big on strategy, if the younger demographics who support it 91%, why aren't things being done the way they were sort of in the civil rights movement with like marches in Washington, demonstrations, and that kind of thing? Why doesn't it come to that?
It's because a lot of people aren't aware that this is an issue anymore. A lot of people aren't even aware that the ban is still in place. They think to themselves that'll solve the problem, and it didn't.
So you think it's going to get to that point?
With education efforts like we're doing. Yes.
And I'll say too, when you ask why people aren't marching on Washington in favor of lifting the ban, well, like Jared said, it's a very real fact that a lot of people don't know the ban still exists or misunderstand what it means. But you also have a lot of other factors like, a lot of the people who favor lifting the ban are pro-military also. I mean, they just want to go back in and serve. And they are also, at this time very sensitive about, marching on Washington, appearing to be anti-military. And that's another thing too. That's, our critics a lot of times accuse us of being anti-military, which, is the farthest from the truth for us personally. But also too, you have people like this guy Duncan Hunter, the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, refuses to even believe the polls. He just, in fact, we know a guy that just the other day we got an email where a guy we know back in Washington ran into Duncan Hunter at was that a fundraiser?
Was that a function?
A function back in Washington. Ran into him and cornered him for a minute and asked him why he's not marking up the bill in committee, the Military Readiness Enhancement Act. And Hunter just replied, well, nobody wants to serve with gays, and tried to walk away. And the guy followed him and was like, threw some polling numbers at him. And he said, oh, that's just not true. He just totally dismissed it. So, I mean, you got people like that who are in control right now, who just refuse to believe, even, like I said, even Fox News shows that, the 63% of the American public favor lifting the ban in their poll, but you got people that refuse to believe. So there's a lot of factors as to why in this particular, at this particular time, there's not some huge, massive movement to lift the ban. Although, when you look at it in a rational way, I mean, in my opinion, it's just kind of like a no-brainer.
And quick yes or no question: if the ban was lifted and you could go back, even if you were discharged, would you re-enlist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right, well, in there, we know you guys are going to start spring break. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And we can stick around too if anyone else wants to stick around and talk to us. Stick around and talk to us. Stick around and talk to us. Stick around and talk to us.